The Presence in the Barn, a Haunted Library production. Our Jeep broke down in Madison County, Arkansas, just as the sun was setting. As the engine sputtered, I glanced through the windshield to see the moon covered up by ominous storm clouds. I had decided to take some back roads, the scenic route. The country out here was amazing. The decision had backfired on me. We were still 40 miles from home. My girlfriend and me had spent the day fishing in a town about 3 hours away. The day had gone great until the Jeep had begun to break down. I tried everything, but I simply didn't know what was wrong with the engine. We pulled over alongside of the road and got out. I spent the next 30 minutes under the hood, but to no avail. We were on a dirt road far back in the countryside, and not a single car had drove by in the time we had broken down. The town we were in was Walnut Ridge. I had seen the sign as I'd veered off the interstate for a soda. I looked at my phone as the wind began to gust. I had no service, neither did my girlfriend, Krista. At this point, she was pretty upset with me, because she had insisted we take the quicker way home, the way we had come, that being the interstate. I slammed the hood in frustration. We would have to walk to the nearest house to get some help. I had no idea how we were going to get home, and there wasn't a taxi service that would come out here to get us and take us 40 miles. So we began to walk. I grabbed a jacket from the back seat and gave it to Krista as the wind continued to pick up. It had now begun to sprinkle too. It didn't take long to notice there wasn't a house in sight, and we hadn't seen a house in miles before breaking down. Thunder rang out 15 minutes into the walk. I began to feel bad for taking this route. It was near dark and it was getting chilly. I checked my phone as I held my girl close, trying my best to butter her up, assuring her we'd find help. Just then it began to pour. This was just fantastic. I wish I would have just stayed in the Jeep and waited until somebody had passed to flag them down. It was one bad decision after another. As the rain began to pour, far out in an open field, I saw an old barn. Beyond the barn was a thick patch of dense woods. I told Krista to come on as I led her off the road and into the field. The rain from the storm was coming down so hard it stung our skin. We covered up and jogged blindly, hardly able to see where we were stepping because of the downpour. Completely drenched, we finally reached the barn door. The door was large, heavy, and very hard to open. It was easy to tell that nobody had been here in quite some time. Not trying to be out here in this downpour any more than possible, I pulled her by the wrist inside. It was damp inside and the air was heavy with moisture, but there was no leak so far. The barn was mostly open, with a few pens on each side with a gate to each pen that was about 5 feet high. At the opposite end was a ladder that led to the second level. I turned on my cell phone's flashlight to navigate. I didn't feel like tripping over something sharp in here and being injured in this place. Rain pummeled the barn as the wind howled. A thunderstorm was definitely passing through, and it was strong. Thunder boomed, and I could see lightning flashes from the cracks of wood in the barn's wall. Krista shivered. I could tell she was scared. She was only 21. I consoled her and told her it was going to be okay, and that we would just simply wait the storm out here, then go back to the Jeep. That's when I heard the rustling sounds coming from the top level of the barn. At this point, we were standing directly in the middle of the barn. We froze. I looked up in the darkness, holding my hand out in front of her, silently motioning her not to move. We listened as the sound continued. Somebody was upstairs walking around. Then the back door opened behind us. We both jumped. By the time we had turned, all we saw was an open barn door. Lightning flashed, illuminating the field. Krista whispered, "What the hell was that, Mark?" I tried my best to not let my fear show. We had only been together a year now, and I was the protective, brave boyfriend. "It was just the wind, babe," though my voice lacked confidence. I pulled her closer to me. My bigger concern was the noise coming from upstairs. Somebody or something was up there. The barn was bigger than I thought once I was able to get a better look with the light. "If there's anybody in here, we are just trying to get out of the storm." My words were met with a dead silence. Even the rustling of footsteps above stopped at my admission. I contemplated just leaving this place. It felt odd. The atmosphere in here was very heavy, and I just felt uneasy. But the storm was bad. The wind outside was gusting so hard it could have easily been 60-mile-per-hour winds. This had been an unexpected thunderstorm that we didn't typically see this time of fall. Hail began to ping the barn, further reinforcing my decision to stay put. For the next few minutes we stood in silence, Krista latching onto me, shivering from the chill the storm had brought. I decided to turn the light from my phone off, wanting to preserve the battery just in case. Then I heard more rustling. I turned on my light to see a figure quickly descend the ladder. It looked humanoid, and it didn't appear to have any clothes on. Its eyes were a very bright blue, its skin pale. If this were a person, he or she was very malnourished. Krista bear hugged me. My heart thumped at the sudden realization that somebody or something was in here with us. I backed up as the entity darted off into the stall below. It had jumped the gate that led into the enclosed area. "What the fuck was that?" Krista whispered frantically. "What the fuck was that, Mark?" She was gripping my arm so tight I felt her nails dig into my skin. "Look," I called out, my voice nearly cracking. "Like I said, we're just seeking shelter here. There's a bad storm outside." Again, I got no answer. Looking back, I'm not sure what possessed me to do it, but I told Krista to wait while I went and investigated the stall area where the figure had rushed into. It would be a decision I would later regret for the rest of my life. As I inched closer to the dark stall, my light began to illuminate that area. I saw a figure crouched in the corner behind an old riding lawnmower. I stopped, my heart rate thumping with sudden fear. The cell phone light played over the riding mower as I saw a pair of humanoid white hands grip the steering wheel. Whatever this thing or person was, it had long, lanky arms that appeared bruised or spotted with large purple blotches. Big, scary eyes stared at me with a mouth that was far too large to be that of a human's mouth. The jaw extended down, and now I could see small, jagged, sharp teeth. Frozen in disbelief, my breath was instantly taken from my lungs. This thing had blotchy white skin that didn't look like flesh. It hissed and growled at me, making a noise only an animal could make, not any animal that I knew of. Krista must have heard this because she began to panic. She was on the verge of tears. I finally found my wits and was able to move. I slowly began to back up. As I backpedaled, keeping my light on the ghastly figure, it began to stand upright, and I quickly realized it was much taller than I had calculated. It stood fully, well over 6 feet, probably closer to 7 foot. It was very, very tall. Before I could reach Krista, I heard a piercing scream from behind me. It was Krista, and she was being dragged away by another very similar humanoid monster. The thing was much taller than her, like the one in the pen, and it was pulling her outside with swiftness. I bolted for Krista, stepping out into the storm. A brilliant flash of lightning struck, momentarily blinded me. I covered my eyes and looked up to see this thing carrying my girlfriend as it ran for the woods behind the barn. Krista was screaming and kicking as she flailed her arms over its spiny, long back. I gave chase, fear instantly leaving my body, replaced by adrenaline and a need to save the woman I loved from this unknown creature that had kidnapped her. But the more I ran, the more distance that was put between us. A flash of lightning revealed the terror and desperation in her eyes as she flopped over this thing's shoulder. It was abnormally fast and strong, carrying her weight. It didn't run like it was human either. I yelled her name as she faded out of my view. I screamed into the night, into the rain, that I loved her and that I was sorry, as I panted, finally losing my breath from the sprint. This was a big, big field. The creature had just about reached the woods, and I knew in my heart I would never see my girlfriend again. That's when a flash of lightning struck just beyond them, and this must have spooked it, because it released her and kept running into the woods. I saw her fall. I used my last bit of energy to run to her. By the time I got to her side, I felt like throwing up, and I almost did. I knelt down, panting like a runner who had just run a 6-mile run, rainwater nearly blinding my eyes. She put her arms around me and kissed me. She was hysterical and crying. If this thing were to come back, now would have been a perfect time, because I was helpless and gassed. But it didn't. After a few minutes, I caught my breath and saw a pair of large, yellowish eyes watching us from the woods. The lightning lit the creature up as it hunkered down. I wasted little time in getting up and leading her back through the field. Thankfully, it had stopped hailing, but the rain was still coming down so hard we could barely see in front of us. There was no way I was going back in that barn where the creatures were living. Back to back, we walked slowly, looking out for each other from our own views, just in case something tried to creep up on us. We made it past the barn without incident. Soon we were back to my Jeep. I had never been so relieved to be back in my vehicle, even if it was broken down. I was fortunate enough to flag a motorist down and get a ride into town where we were able to call a friend to come pick us up. Throughout all this, Krista was not harmed other than outright post-traumatic stress. The next day, my father gave me a ride back to my Jeep. Krista stayed home. I had told my parents about it, and so had she. They believed that something had happened to us, but they didn't know exactly what had tried to carry her off. Krista had not slept much since, and she was very traumatized. When she did sleep for an hour here and there, she would have nightmares. Before leaving Walnut Ridge, I also made a police report. The police were very nice, and they could tell I wasn't lying by my emotions as I told the story. They informed my father and me that the barn had been abandoned for the past 20 years, and that I wasn't the first person to report strange activity or see something beyond the realm of existence in that area. Apparently, something was living in or around that barn that defied logic. My father helped me get the Jeep running, and I wasted no time in getting the hell out of there. I was able to see the barn in the distance. I thought about what would have happened had Krista really disappeared. Nobody would have believed me. I would have been the prime suspect in my girlfriend's disappearance. The storm that had led us astray from the road was the same storm that had saved her life and my sanity with a blinding flash of lightning. I turned my head back to the road and did my best to put the whole ordeal out of my mind as I drove out of that town, never to return.